Tonight, we tell the story of a wizard most people think they already know. A wizard remembered for betrayal, for pride, and for his fall from grace. But that is only the final chapter. Long before the War of the Ring, long before Orthanc filled with smoke and iron, and long before he called himself Saruman of many colors, he was Saruman the Wise. He was the greatest scholar in Middle-earth, the leader of the Istari, and a traveler who spent centuries gathering knowledge from forgotten kingdoms and ruined libraries. He was a protector, respected by elves, men, and wizards alike. Tonight, rather than focusing on his downfall, we will follow the long road that led him there, a road stretching across nearly 2,000 years, through ancient archives, lost kingdoms, forgotten ruins, and distant lands beyond the maps of most travelers. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy relaxing journeys through Tolkien's world. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Now dim the lights, settle comfortably beneath your blankets, listen to the wind beyond the western sea, and let us travel back to a time when Saruman was still one of the greatest hopes of Middle-earth. Long before darkness entered his heart. Long before the Tower of Orthanc became his prison. Our story begins far beyond the shores of Middle-earth, beyond even the sight of the sun, in the undying lands. Long before kingdoms rose and fell, long before Gondor existed, and long before the One Ring was ever found again, there stood Valinor, the Blessed Realm. It was a land untouched by age and decay, a land where immortal beings walked beneath golden trees and silver stars. Among those beings was one known as Cormo, the spirit who would someday become Saruman. Even then, he possessed a restless mind. While others delighted in music, gardens, or the beauty of the Blessed Realm, Cormo often sought knowledge. He studied craft, order, and the making of things. He listened carefully to the wisdom of powers greater than himself, and he remembered everything. Knowledge fascinated him. Not for power, not yet. He simply wished to understand. A noble desire, perhaps the noblest. For understanding is often the first step toward wisdom. Yet, it can also become something else, something far more dangerous. But that danger lay in the distant future. For now, the world beyond the sea faced a growing shadow. Sauron had survived the ancient wars, and his influence spread slowly across Middle-earth. Kingdoms trembled, dark places multiplied, and so the Valar made a decision. They would not send armies. They would not send overwhelming power. Instead, they would send guides, teachers, and helpers. 5 spirits clothed in the bodies of old men, the Istari, the wizards. Among them stood Cormo, tall, proud, and wise. He was the first chosen for the task. Even among the Istari, he was considered exceptional, the natural leader, the one most suited to the mission, the one others would follow. And so he crossed the sea, not as a conqueror and not as a king, but as a servant sent to aid the peoples of Middle-earth. The voyage was long. The world awaiting him was vast, unknown, and beautiful. When at last the Grey Havens appeared upon the horizon, Middle-earth stretched before him like an unopened book. Forests older than memory, mountains untouched by roads, kingdoms rising from ancient foundations, thousands of years of history waiting to be explored. Most travelers would have seen endless wilderness. Saruman saw questions, mysteries, knowledge waiting to be discovered. And for many centuries, that curiosity would make him one of the greatest defenders Middle-earth had ever known. The shores of Lindon welcomed him. The elves received him with honor. The wise listened when he spoke. Even in those early years, his reputation spread quickly. Not because he sought fame, but because wisdom naturally attracts attention. Saruman seemed to understand things others overlooked, patterns hidden within history, lessons buried within ancient events, connections linking distant ages together. Many believed no mind in Middle-earth surpassed his. Perhaps they were right. And that was both his greatest gift and the first seed of his eventual tragedy. But those days remained far ahead. For now, the White Wizard had only just arrived. The road stretched endlessly before him, and the greatest journey of his life was about to begin. The early centuries of Saruman's life in Middle-earth passed quietly, not because nothing happened, but because much of his work unfolded beyond the notice of ordinary people. Wars and kings often dominate the histories, yet behind many important events stand individuals who spend years gathering knowledge, studying dangers, and preparing for threats long before they appear. For a very long time, Saruman was one of those individuals. The White Wizard traveled widely during those years, far more widely than many realized. The roads of Middle-earth were different then. Kingdoms stood where later generations would find only ruins. Forests stretched farther. Ancient roads remained intact beneath the trees. The memory of older ages still lingered across the land. Saruman wandered through all of it, patiently, curiously, and endlessly. Unlike many travelers, he rarely seemed interested in comfort. A simple room was enough. A small fire was enough. What interested him was learning. Every ruined tower, every forgotten monument, every fragment of history hidden within an old manuscript. The world itself became his library, and Middle-earth was a very large library indeed. The elves respected him. That alone says much. Elves were not easily impressed. Many had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. They measured wisdom differently than men, yet even among them, Saruman earned admiration. He listened carefully. He studied diligently. He possessed patience. Most importantly, he possessed memory. An extraordinary memory. Conversations held centuries earlier remained clear within his mind. Names lost to history remained familiar to him. Ancient genealogies, forgotten battles, and ruined kingdoms all found a place within his thoughts. Knowledge accumulated year after year, century after century, like water filling a deep reservoir. One can imagine him crossing the lands of Eriador during those years, walking beneath endless skies and passing through forests where sunlight filtered through ancient leaves. He visited settlements whose names would later vanish from maps. The White Wizard seemed driven by a desire to understand the entire world, not merely pieces of it. Its history, its peoples, its mysteries, its dangers, especially its dangers. For even during these peaceful centuries, Sauron remained a concern. Not an immediate threat, not yet. More like a shadow lingering beyond the horizon. The wise knew he had not truly vanished. They understood that evil often worked slowly, quietly, and patiently. And so Saruman studied. If Sauron returned one day, knowledge would be needed. Knowledge of history, knowledge of ancient mistakes, knowledge of powers long forgotten. The White Wizard intended to be prepared. His reputation continued growing. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. Gradually, a remarkable consensus emerged among the wise. When difficult questions arose, Saruman often possessed answers. When mysteries appeared, Saruman usually knew where to begin searching. When ancient records required interpretation, he was frequently the first person consulted. His wisdom became trusted. His judgment became respected, even among powerful individuals. This was the period many modern readers rarely consider, the period before ambition, before pride, and before obsession. The period when Saruman truly deserved his title, Saruman the Wise, because wisdom and intelligence are not the same thing. Many people are intelligent, far fewer become wise. During these centuries, Saruman possessed both. He did not merely collect information, he understood it. He connected ideas separated by centuries. He recognized patterns invisible to others. He saw history as a living thing, a vast web of causes and consequences stretching across ages. One can imagine long evenings spent in conversation with elven scholars, candles burning low beside stacks of manuscripts, questions leading to more questions, the pursuit of understanding becoming a reward in itself. Those were happy years, though Saruman himself might never have described them that way. He was not a sentimental figure, and rarely indulged in nostalgia. Yet looking back, one suspects these centuries contained a kind of happiness. Direction, meaning, the satisfaction of serving something greater than oneself. Outside the windows of forgotten libraries, seasons changed. Leaves fell, snow arrived, spring returned, again and again. Meanwhile, the White Wizard continued his work. Always learning, always searching, always moving. Among the Istari, his position remained secure. The leader, the most respected, the most knowledgeable, the one others naturally looked toward when difficult decisions appeared, even Gandalf. This often surprises modern audiences because they know how the story ends. They know Gandalf eventually becomes the greatest of the wizards. Yet, for much of Middle-earth's history, Saruman stood above him, if not officially, then certainly in reputation. The White Wizard's voice carried authority. His conclusions carried weight. His scholarship seemed unmatched. No one questioned that reality, least of all Saruman himself. And therein lay a subtle danger. Not yet pride, not yet arrogance. Only confidence. The confidence of someone who has spent centuries being correct. The confidence of someone whose wisdom is constantly affirmed. A dangerous thing. Because confidence grows quietly, like roots beneath the soil. Invisible at first, then impossible to remove. But those roots had only just begun to spread. The shadow they would eventually cast remained far away. For now, Saruman continued traveling, continued studying, continued gathering knowledge from every corner of Middle-earth. And among all the lands he explored, none would capture his attention more completely than the great southern kingdom of Gondor. For within the libraries of Minas Tirith lay records unlike any found elsewhere. Records that would change the course of his life. Records that contained whispers of a subject destined to consume him. The Rings of Power. Let us leave the forests and wandering roads behind and journey south, far to the south, to the greatest kingdom of men still standing in Middle-earth, Gondor. For many travelers, Gondor was a place of white towers, mighty armies, and proud cities. Saruman saw something different. He saw history. The kingdom itself was a living archive. Every stone carried memory. Every monument preserved a fragment of an older age, and every hall echoed with voices long vanished. And nowhere embodied that history more completely than Minas Tirith, the White City, the City of Kings, built upon 7 levels of white stone beneath the shadow of Mount Mindalluin. Even after centuries of travel, the city impressed Saruman, not because of its beauty, though it was beautiful, and not because of its strength, though its walls were mighty. What fascinated him was its memory. Gondor remembered things forgotten elsewhere, things preserved through generations of careful record-keeping. The traveler can imagine Saruman approaching the city during one of his many visits. The long road winding upward through the levels, guards recognizing the White Wizard immediately, doors opening, and archives waiting. Unlike warriors who visited Gondor seeking alliances or military strength, Saruman sought books, records, documents, and the quiet treasures hidden far from public view. Deep within the city stood archives, accumulated over centuries, rooms lined with scrolls, shelves crowded with manuscripts, and ancient texts copied and preserved by countless scribes. Knowledge gathered from generations stretching back to Numenor itself. For Saruman, such places were irresistible. Entire weeks could disappear while he studied, sometimes months. The outside world faded, the turning of seasons became irrelevant, and only the search remained. One text led to another. One mystery opened the door to a dozen more. The White Wizard developed a reputation among the scholars of Gondor. Patient, relentless, meticulous. If a forgotten reference appeared in one document, Saruman would search every available source connected to it. If an old king mentioned a lost artifact, he would trace every surviving record concerning that artifact. Few minds possessed such discipline, and fewer still possessed the time. Saruman had both, and so his knowledge expanded. The archives revealed a world hidden beneath ordinary history, a world of vanished kingdoms, lost lineages, ancient wars, and ruined fortresses reclaimed by forests. The traveler imagines him standing beside narrow windows overlooking the city, a scroll in hand, the mountains beyond glowing beneath sunset, hours passing unnoticed. Because once Saruman encountered a mystery, he rarely abandoned it. The desire to understand burned deeply within him. At first, this quality was admirable, perhaps even heroic. Knowledge, after all, protects. History teaches. The wise needed people willing to preserve forgotten truths, and for centuries, Saruman performed that role better than anyone. The scholars of Gondor respected him enormously. Many considered him the greatest living authority on ancient history. When questions arose concerning Numenor, Saruman was consulted. When ancient maps required interpretation, Saruman was consulted. When fragments of forgotten languages appeared, Saruman was consulted. Again and again, year after year, his expertise became legendary. The traveler can almost hear the quiet atmosphere of those archives, the rustle of parchment, the scratching of quills, sunlight moving slowly across stone floors. It was a place where knowledge accumulated patiently, a place perfectly suited to the White Wizard's temperament. Yet, beneath all these studies, a subtle change was beginning. Not corruption, not yet. Something much smaller. A shift in focus. Because among all the histories preserved within Minas Tirith, certain subjects drew Saruman's attention more strongly than others. Power, ancient power, lost power, particularly the powers connected to the Second Age, the Age of Sauron, the Age of Numenor, the Age of the Rings of Power. At first, these studies seemed entirely reasonable. After all, understanding Sauron meant understanding his history, and understanding his history meant studying the rings. No one questioned the logic, least of all Saruman. Yet, the traveler notices something. Whenever a scholar spends centuries examining a single subject, the subject inevitably begins shaping the scholar in return. The process is gradual, almost invisible. Questions become fascinations. Fascinations become obsessions. Obsessions become identities. Saruman remained far from that point, but the road had begun. A road paved not by evil intentions, not by greed, not by malice, but by curiosity. Pure curiosity, the most innocent beginning imaginable. Outside the archives, Gondor continued living its life. Kings ruled, seasons changed, generations passed. Meanwhile, deep within stone halls lined with forgotten records, the White Wizard continued searching. Always searching, always reading, always asking one more question. And eventually, those questions would lead him north, to older mysteries, to lands where kingdoms had fallen long ago, to the haunted remnants of Arnor. For if Gondor preserved memory in books, Arnor preserved memory in ruins, and Saruman intended to study both. Let us leave the bright halls of Minas Tirith behind. The archives remain where they have always stood, sheltered within white stone and guarded by centuries of careful stewardship. But Saruman's search was never content to remain in one place. Knowledge hidden in books was valuable. Knowledge hidden in the land itself fascinated him even more. And so the White Wizard eventually turned north, far north, toward a kingdom that no longer existed, Arnor. To most people, Arnor was a memory, a name preserved in histories, a realm that had once rivaled Gondor before fading into ruin. Its kings were gone, its cities abandoned, its roads broken by time and weather. Only fragments remained. Yet Saruman understood something important. Ruins still speak. One simply has to learn how to listen. The traveler can imagine him crossing Eriador during these years. Long stretches of empty land rolling beneath vast skies, ancient roads appearing unexpectedly among the grass before vanishing once more. Crumbled watchtowers standing alone against the horizon. The Northern Kingdom had become a landscape of ghosts. Not literal ghosts, but memories, echoes, and traces left behind when great civilizations disappear. Many travelers found such places melancholy. Saruman found them irresistible, because ruins reveal truths that living kingdoms often hide. A functioning city constantly changes. Buildings are repaired, roads are rebuilt, and old structures disappear beneath new ones. Ruins preserve history differently. They remain frozen, waiting patiently through the centuries. And Saruman possessed the patience required to study them. One might promise the weather of Eriador suited such journeys. Long autumn evenings, cold mornings, and mist gathering among forgotten hills. The traveler imagines the white wizard standing alone atop an ancient earthwork as the sun disappeared beyond the western horizon. The wind moving through tall grass, the remains of walls barely visible beneath moss. Nothing dramatic, nothing spectacular, yet Saruman could see what others could not. He could imagine the past, the soldiers once stationed there, the merchants traveling the roads below, the kings whose banners had flown from those ruined towers. History became alive within his mind. This gift made him exceptional. It also made him increasingly isolated, because very few people shared his interests. Most sought comfort, company, and conversation. Saruman often preferred forgotten places, ancient foundations, and silent remnants of vanished worlds. There, he found questions worth asking, and Arnor was full of questions. The traveler follows him northward through the old lands of Arthedain, across weathered hills where kingdoms once stood, toward places that later generations would scarcely remember. Among these ruins, Saruman discovered something he valued greatly: perspective. The fall of Arnor had not happened in a single battle or a single year. The kingdom had weakened gradually. Divisions appeared, pride grew, and enemies exploited old wounds. Century after century, the decline continued. Saruman studied these patterns carefully because he believed history contained lessons, and history did. The ruins of Arnor demonstrated how even noble realms could disappear, how strength alone was insufficient, and how wisdom must accompany power. The traveler suspects Saruman genuinely wished to learn these lessons, at least during these years. He was not seeking domination. He was seeking understanding. The distinction matters because tragedy often begins with admirable intentions. The White Wizard continued wandering through old fortresses, abandoned settlements, and watchtowers overlooking empty roads. Everywhere he traveled, he gathered fragments, maps, records, and stories preserved by isolated communities. Even local legends interested him, especially local legends, for beneath exaggeration and myth, traces of truth often survived. Many evenings were spent beside lonely campfires, beneath star-filled skies, with ancient ruins silhouetted against moonlit hills and the wind carrying the sounds of distant wilderness. The traveler imagines those moments as peaceful. Perhaps they were among the happiest of Saruman's life. No counsels, no responsibilities, no expectations. Only the road, the search, and the endless mystery of Middle-earth. Yet, while Arnor offered countless historical treasures, something else increasingly occupied the White Wizard's thoughts. The rings. Always the rings. References appeared unexpectedly. A passing mention within a royal chronicle, a fragment preserved in an elvish text, a forgotten note hidden among genealogies. The clues were small, scattered, and incomplete. Yet Saruman noticed them, always. His remarkable memory connected details others overlooked. Patterns emerged, questions multiplied. The rings of power seemed woven through far more of history than most people realized. The traveler can almost feel the moment when curiosity begins deepening into something stronger. Not obsession yet, but fascination. The subject continually returned, no matter where Saruman traveled, no matter what kingdom he studied. The rings waited in the background, a mystery larger than all the others, a puzzle stretching across entire ages, and perhaps most importantly, a puzzle that only Saruman seemed capable of solving. That thought arrived quietly, almost innocently, yet it lingered, because after centuries of study, the White Wizard increasingly believed he understood things others did not. Again, this was not entirely arrogance. Often it was true. His knowledge had become extraordinary, his expertise unmatched. The danger lay elsewhere, in the growing belief that no one else's understanding could equal his own. The roots remained small, barely visible, but they continued spreading beneath the surface. Meanwhile, the road carried Saruman onward across ruined kingdoms and forgotten landscapes, ever deeper into the mysteries of the past. Eventually, those mysteries would lead him toward a single question that would dominate the rest of his life. Not the fate of Arnor, not the history of Gondor, not even the rise of Sauron, but the secret history of the rings themselves. A question so compelling that the White Wizard would spend centuries pursuing its answer. Let us leave the windswept ruins of Arnor behind. The old kingdoms fade into the distance. The broken towers disappear beneath the horizon. And once more we find Saruman where he was often happiest, among books, among records, among the silent company of long-dead scholars. By now, centuries have passed since his arrival in Middle-earth. Kingdoms have changed, rulers have come and gone, and entire generations have lived and died. Yet, Saruman remains, watching, studying, and learning. His reputation has never been greater. Among the wise, he is regarded as the foremost authority on ancient war. Among men, he is a figure of immense respect. Among elves, his knowledge is admired even when it is not always agreed with. The White Wizard has become exactly what the Valar intended him to be: a guide, a teacher, and a guardian against the return of darkness. And yet, quietly, something has begun occupying more and more of his attention. The rings of power, not the One Ring specifically, not yet, but all of them. Their creation, their purpose, their history, their makers. The mystery fascinated him completely, partly because so much had been forgotten, partly because so many records contradicted one another, but mostly because the rings represented something unique, a meeting point between wisdom and power, knowledge and mastery, creation and control. The very subjects that had always interested him. The traveler imagines Saruman seated alone within a quiet chamber of Minas Tirith. A dozen scrolls spread across a table, candles burning low, rain tapping softly against distant windows, and hours passing unnoticed. One text references Celebrimbor. Another mentions the craftsmen of Idrion. A third describes events from centuries earlier. Separately, each document reveals little. Together, they form a larger picture, a puzzle, and Saruman loves puzzles. The deeper he studies, the more questions emerge. How exactly were the rings made? What knowledge had been required? What secrets had vanished alongside their creators? How much of that wisdom survived? How much had been lost forever? The White Wizard follows every clue, no matter how small, no matter how obscure. A forgotten passage hidden within an old manuscript becomes worthy of investigation. A damaged scroll copied centuries ago becomes invaluable. References dismissed by others suddenly gain importance because Saruman possesses a gift that few scholars ever develop. He sees connections. The traveler can almost watch his mind working. A fragment from Gondor, a legend preserved among elves, an observation recorded by a long-dead king, separately meaningless, together revealing patterns. Slowly and patiently, the history of the rings begins unfolding before him. Not completely, never completely, but enough. Enough to deepen his fascination. The office grows dark. The candles burn lower. Storms come and go outside, and years pass. Yet, Saruman continues. The search itself becomes part of his life, a constant companion. The traveler notices something interesting during this period. Saruman is still not seeking power. That is the common misunderstanding. So, many later assume he always desired domination, that his corruption was inevitable. The truth is more complicated, much more tragic. At this stage, Saruman genuinely believes knowledge itself is the answer. Knowledge can defeat Sauron. Knowledge can prepare the free peoples. Knowledge can uncover dangers before they arise. These beliefs are not wrong. In fact, they are largely correct. Knowledge is valuable. Knowledge is necessary. The danger appears only when knowledge becomes an end unto itself. When understanding matters more than wisdom, and discovery matters more than purpose. The White Wizard has not crossed that line yet, but he walks closer to it every year. The traveler imagines countless evenings spent exactly the same way. Ancient texts, careful notes, maps spread across tables, and questions leading to more questions. A life devoted entirely to learning. From the outside, it appears admirable, and in many ways it is. Few people dedicate themselves so completely to protecting the future. Few work so tirelessly to understand the threats facing Middle-earth. Yet, there is a cost. Always a cost. Because while Saruman studies the rings begin shaping his thoughts. Not magically, not through corruption, through focus. Anything studied for centuries eventually becomes part of the mind studying it. The subject begins influencing how one sees the world, and increasingly Saruman sees history through the lens of power. How power rises, how power spreads, how power changes kingdoms, and how power can be directed, controlled, and used. The traveler notices that his questions are changing, not dramatically, but subtly. At first he asks what the rings were. Later he asks how they worked. Then why they worked. And eventually, what could be learned from them. That final question lingers quietly and dangerously because curiosity has entered a new stage. The White Wizard still serves the cause of good, still opposes Sauron, and still wishes to protect Middle-earth. Yet, his fascination is no longer purely historical. The rings have become personal, an intellectual challenge unlike any he has ever encountered, a mystery worthy of centuries, a mystery worthy of him. Outside the libraries and archives, the world continues turning. The White Council gathers, kingdoms rise and fall. The shadow of Sauron slowly strengthens in distant lands. But Saruman remains focused, searching, studying, and following every surviving trace left behind by the makers of the rings. As the years stretch into centuries, one truth becomes increasingly clear. The White Wizard no longer studies the rings merely because they are important. He studies them because he cannot stop. Because somewhere along the way, fascination became obsession, and the road ahead grows far more dangerous than the one behind. For soon Saruman would begin asking a question that no one else dares ask. Not where the rings came from, but whether their secrets can ever truly be mastered. The change did not happen in a single moment. There was no dark revelation, no sudden temptation, no whispered promise carried on the wind. If there had been, perhaps it would have been easier to resist. Instead, the change arrived the way most dangerous things arrive. Quietly, gradually, almost invisibly. Years became decades. Decades became centuries. And throughout it all, Saruman continued studying the rings of power. The traveler might imagine a scholar standing beside a river. At first, he merely observes the current. Then, he begins following it. Later, he realizes he has traveled miles from where he started. Yet, he cannot identify the exact moment the journey began. Such was Saruman's path. The White Wizard still opposed Sauron. Of that, there is no doubt. He remained a member of the White Council. He remained respected among the wise. He remained committed to protecting Middle-earth. Increasingly, his thoughts returned to the same subject again and again. The rings, their making, their secrets, and their possibilities. One question led naturally to another. If the rings could preserve strength, how? If they could enhance influence, by what means? If they could shape the world around them, what principles governed that power? These were not foolish questions. They were precisely the sort of questions a great scholar would ask, and Saruman was a great scholar, perhaps the greatest. That was the problem, because intelligence often convinces itself it can safely approach dangers that would destroy others. So, the traveler can imagine long nights spent alone in forgotten archives, candles burning low, ancient texts spread across tables, and a world outside disappearing entirely. Hour after hour was devoted to understanding powers that few living beings truly comprehended. The work became consuming, not because Saruman desired evil, because he desired answers, and answers have a peculiar way of creating new questions. Every discovery opened another door. Every solved mystery revealed a larger one beyond it. The pursuit became endless. At some point, the White Wizard stopped asking whether the search should continue. He only asked where it should lead next. That distinction mattered. The wise know when to stop. The obsessed do not. Yet, obsession rarely announces itself. It disguises itself as dedication, as discipline, as commitment. From the outside, Saruman appeared unchanged, still dignified, still respected, still wise. The traveler suspects that even Gandalf did not immediately recognize how deeply the fascination had grown, because there was nothing obvious to see. no corruption, no cruelty. Only increasing isolation, increasing focus, and increasing certainty. Certainty, above all, was the first truly dangerous sign. For centuries, Saruman had been correct more often than anyone else. His conclusions had guided councils. His knowledge had solved mysteries. His judgment had earned admiration from kings and scholars alike. Such success leaves marks upon the mind. Gradually, the White Wizard began trusting his own conclusions more than anyone else's. Again, not entirely without reason. His knowledge was extraordinary. Yet, wisdom requires something more than knowledge. Humility, the willingness to believe that another perspective may reveal something you cannot see. That quality began fading, slowly, so slowly that almost no one noticed. The traveler imagines meetings of the White Council during these years. Elrond speaking, Galadriel offering insight, Gandalf raising concerns, Saruman listening carefully, thoughtfully, politely, yet increasingly convinced that he alone possessed the fullest understanding. Not because he was arrogant, not consciously, but because he genuinely believed his centuries of study had given him unique insight. And perhaps they had. The tragedy is that unique insight can easily become isolation. Isolation becomes certainty, and certainty becomes blindness. The rings occupied more of his attention than ever before. The old records of Gondor, the surviving lore of Yggdrasil, and fragments preserved among the elves were examined repeatedly. Every clue was reconsidered. The White Wizard searched not only for knowledge, he searched for mastery. Not mastery over others, not yet, but mastery over uncertainty. The traveler notices something deeply human in this. For what is obsession, if not the desire to eliminate uncertainty, to find answers so complete that doubt can no longer exist? Yet doubt serves a purpose. It reminds us of our limits. Saruman gradually forgot that lesson. Not because he became foolish, but because he became too confident in his own wisdom. Outside, the centuries continued passing. The forests changed. Kingdoms changed. The world moved forward. Yet Saruman remained focused on the same mystery, the same search, the same unanswered questions. And somewhere during those long years, another idea began forming. A dangerous idea. Not evil, not yet. Merely logical. If Sauron returned, if the Dark Lord truly regained strength, would knowledge alone be enough? Could wisdom alone defeat such a fall? The question lingered, refusing to disappear. The White Wizard had spent centuries studying power, studying the rings, and studying the rise and fall of kingdoms. Increasingly, he began suspecting that power itself might be necessary. Not for domination, but for protection, for victory. The distinction seemed important, at least to him. Perhaps it truly was, at first, yet history contains many tragedies. born from the belief that noble goals justify dangerous means. Saruman was still far from becoming the figure remembered in the War of the Ring. Far from it. The traveler must remember that. He remained respected enough that few questioned him, wise enough that many trusted him completely, and good enough that his intentions still seemed honorable. Yet, beneath the surface, the foundation was shifting. Knowledge had become obsession. Obsession had become certainty, and certainty was quietly preparing the road toward pride. The road stretched eastward now, far beyond Gondor, far beyond Arnor, beyond the lands known to most travelers, beyond the maps hanging in libraries and royal halls, toward vast territories spoken of only in fragments, toward ancient mysteries hidden beneath unfamiliar stars, toward Rohan, the east, a land of endless horizons and forgotten secrets. And there, farther from home than he had ever traveled before, Saruman would discover things that changed him forever. Let us leave the libraries behind. For centuries, Saruman had searched among books, among scrolls, among records preserved by careful hands. But eventually, even the greatest archives reached their limits. Some knowledge had never been written down. Some truth survived only in distant lands. And so the White Wizard turned east, far east, beyond the familiar kingdoms of the West, beyond Gondor, beyond the lands marked clearly upon most maps, toward Rohan. Even in Tolkien's histories, Rohan remains mysterious, a vast region stretching beyond the known world, a place of immense distances, ancient peoples, forgotten traditions, and histories rarely told in the West. For Saruman, such a place was irresistible. If answers existed beyond the borders of familiar lands, he intended to find them. The journey itself was enormous. Months became years. The traveler imagines endless roads disappearing toward distant horizons. The familiar landscapes of the West gradually giving way to something different, something older, something stranger. The mountains eventually fell behind. The forests became fewer. The open sky grew larger and larger still, until the world seemed made almost entirely of grass and horizon. The plains of Rohan stretched endlessly beneath the heavens, vast seas of wind-swept grass, rolling hills without names, skies so immense they seemed to dwarf everything beneath them. The traveler can almost feel the scale of it. Days passing without sight of a city, weeks crossing open country, the stars becoming constant companions. In the West, mountains often dominate the landscape. In Rohan, the sky reigns supreme. Morning sunlight spread across endless fields. Evening painted the plains in gold and crimson. At night, the stars appeared countless, brighter than anywhere Saruman had traveled before. The White Wizard pressed onward, always onward. Many people imagine Saruman as a figure confined to towers and libraries. Yet, during these centuries, he remained a traveler, a wanderer, a seeker. The roads of Rhûn offered challenges very different from those of Gondor or Eriador. Distances became difficult to measure. Landmarks appeared and vanished. Entire seasons could pass during a single journey. Yet Saruman welcomed such hardships. The search itself remained his purpose. The traveler imagines isolated settlements scattered across the plains, communities shaped by winds and wide horizons, people whose ancestors had lived beneath these skies for countless generations. The histories of the East were different. Not lesser, simply different. Many stories known in the West held little importance here. Different heroes, different kings, different memories. Saruman listened carefully. That was one of his greatest strengths. Long before pride fully claimed him, he possessed a genuine willingness to learn. He collected stories, traditions, and legends preserved through generations. Many scholars dismiss local tales. Saruman rarely did. Because he understood something important. Legends often preserve fragments of truth. A myth can outlive a kingdom. A story can survive long after written records disappear. The traveler imagines evenings spent beneath unfamiliar constellations, campfires burning against the darkness, the endless plains stretching beyond sight, and ancient tales carried upon the night wind. The East felt older in some ways, not literally older, but less documented, less explained. Mysteries lingered there. Questions remained unanswered, and unanswered questions always drew Saruman forward. The further he traveled, the more distant the West became. The White Council, Minas Tirith, the libraries, the familiar roads, all of it seemed very far away now. Only the journey remained, only the search. There is something almost romantic about this chapter of Saruman's life. A great scholar standing at the edge of the known world, crossing lands few Western travelers had ever seen, seeking knowledge for no reward beyond understanding itself. The traveler suspects these years changed him profoundly. Not because he found some hidden evil, not because dark forces corrupted him, because vast landscapes have a way of changing those who cross them. The endless plains encouraged reflection. Long journeys encourage solitude. And solitude encourages certainty. For months at a time, Saruman traveled with little companionship beyond his own thoughts. Thoughts that increasingly revolved around power, history, destiny, and the future of Middle-earth. The traveler notices the pattern again and again. The White Wizard returns to the same question. How can Sauron truly be defeated? Not delayed, not opposed, defeated. The East offered no easy answers, yet it broadened his perspective. The world was larger than the kingdoms of the West. larger than Gondor, larger than Rivendell, larger even than the concerns of the wise. Entire peoples lived beneath these eastern skies, entire histories unfolded beyond the attention of Western scholars. Saruman absorbed everything he could: the geography, the traditions, the stories, and the old knowledge preserved far from the centers of power. And somewhere beyond the rolling grasslands, beyond distant rivers and forgotten roads, rumors began reaching him. Rumors of ancient places, ancient structures, ancient wisdom hidden beneath the stars of the East. Not libraries, not archives. Something older. Places where forgotten knowledge lingered like echoes from a vanished age. The sort of places most travelers would ignore. The sort of places Saruman could never resist. And so the journey continued. Farther east, farther into mystery, toward lonely temples and weathered stones standing beneath endless skies, toward secrets untouched for centuries, toward discoveries that would remain with him long after he finally returned to the West. For the roads of Rhûn were not merely leading Saruman across the world. They were leading him toward the final transformation of his mind. A transformation still incomplete, still invisible, yet drawing closer with every mile traveled beneath the vast eastern stars. Temples beneath forgotten stars. Let us continue eastward, far beyond the lands known to most travelers, far beyond the roads marked on Western maps. The endless grasslands of Rhûn gradually gave way to stranger landscapes. The traveler imagines long stretches of rolling steppe, broken by rocky ridges and weathered hills. Ancient rivers carved silver paths across the earth. Isolated mountains rose unexpectedly from the plains, standing alone beneath vast skies like forgotten monuments. The further Saruman traveled, the older the world seemed. Not older in years, older in feeling. The kingdoms of the West carried clear histories, chronicles, genealogies, and records carefully preserved across generations. The East often preserved its memories differently. Stories passed from parent to child. Songs remembered long after the names within them were forgotten. Legends surviving where books had vanished. For a scholar like Saruman, this fascinated him, because every missing piece hinted at something larger, something hidden, something waiting to be understood. The traveler imagines the white wizard arriving at ancient sites scarcely visited anymore. Weathered stone circles standing alone upon wind-swept hills, broken stairways leading nowhere, ruined foundations swallowed by centuries of grass and dust. Not every ruin belonged to a lost kingdom. Some seemed older than memory itself. Builders forgotten, the purpose uncertain, the stories scattered across time. Saruman studied them all, patiently and carefully, as he always had. Many evenings were spent beneath unfamiliar stars. The night skies of the east appeared different somehow, not because the stars themselves had changed, but because the land beneath them felt so distant from everything he had known. The constellations wheeled overhead. Campfires crackled softly. The wind moved endlessly across the plains, and the White Wizard thought. He had always thought, perhaps too much. The traveler notices that these eastern journeys offered something Saruman rarely found elsewhere. Silence. Not the silence of libraries, not the silence of empty halls, the silence of enormous landscapes, the silence that comes from standing beneath a sky so vast that human concerns seem impossibly small. Many people find such places humbling, yet they can have another effect as well. They can convince a person that they stand alone. And Saruman increasingly did. Not physically, intellectually. The more he learned, the more isolated he became. The more knowledge he gathered, the more difficult it became to find equals with whom to share it. This was not entirely his fault. Few minds possessed his discipline. Few lives lasted long enough to accumulate what he had accumulated. Yet, isolation changes people, even wise people, especially wise people. The traveler imagines Saruman climbing an ancient hill one evening. At its summit stand weathered stones, blackened by countless winters. No inscriptions remain. No clear purpose survives. Only silence, only age, only questions. The White Wizard studies the ruins as sunset spreads across the plains below. The scene feels timeless. A scholar confronting mysteries older than kingdoms. A seeker standing before questions no one can fully answer. There is beauty in that image, but also danger. Because Saruman increasingly believed that every mystery should have an answer. Every puzzle should be solved. Every secret should eventually yield its truth. The world rarely works that way. Some mysteries endure. Some doors remain closed. Wisdom often lies in accepting those limits. Saruman found limits difficult to accept. The traveler notices how often his journeys now revolve around the same themes: power, history, control, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the choices that shape entire ages. Every road eventually leads back to those questions. Every discovery becomes part of a larger pattern forming within his mind. The East did not corrupt him. That would be too simple. Rather, it reinforced ideas already growing inside him. The belief that knowledge could solve every problem. And the belief that understanding could overcome every danger. The belief that enough wisdom could eventually master chaos itself. At first glance, these seem admirable beliefs. Perhaps they are, up to a point. Yet history often reveals a painful truth. No individual, no matter how wise, can fully control the course of the world. Saruman had spent centuries studying history. Ironically, he was beginning to forget that lesson. The traveler imagines one final eastern evening before the long journey home. The sky burns crimson beneath the setting sun. The plains stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The campfire burns low. The stars emerge one by one. And somewhere in the distance, the wind moves through ancient stones. The white wizard sits alone beside the fading fire, older now, wiser perhaps, yet different. The roads of Rune have given him many things: knowledge, perspective, and stories carried from forgotten corners of Middle-earth. But they have also strengthened a dangerous conviction. A conviction still small enough to ignore, still subtle enough to hide, yet growing stronger with every passing year. The belief that he sees more clearly than others. The belief that he understands dangers others fail to recognize. The belief that his judgment should carry greater weight. The traveler can almost see the first shadow of the future Saruman standing there beside the fire. Not the tyrant of Isengard. Not yet. It's power. It's power. The traveler simply a scholar becoming increasingly certain of his own conclusions. A wise man slowly learning to trust himself more than anyone else. The stars wheel silently overhead. The fire burns lower, and far away in the west, Orthanc still stands waiting. The ancient tower of stone, a monument from a forgotten age. A place Saruman will soon call home. When he finally returns, many will see the same white wizard who left years earlier, the same scholar, the same leader, the same guardian of Middle-earth. And in many ways, they will be correct. Yet the roads of Rune have changed him. Not dramatically, not visibly, but permanently. For when he returns to Orthanc, he will no longer be searching for answers alone. He will begin searching for authority, for certainty, for a way to shape the future according to his own vision. And from that moment forward, the long road toward his downfall will truly begin. Let us leave the eastern plains behind. The campfires of Rune fade into memory. The endless horizons disappear beyond distance. The long roads come to an end. And far to the west, rising from the gap of Rohan, stands a tower unlike any other in Middle-earth. Orthanc, black, ancient, unyielding. Even among the great works of forgotten ages, Orthanc was remarkable. The traveler can imagine seeing it for the first time from miles away. A single pillar of dark stone rising above the surrounding lands. Not built from blocks, not assembled piece by piece. It seemed carved from the bones of the earth itself. Its surface remained smooth despite centuries of wind and rain. Its walls appeared almost indestructible. The tower felt less like architecture and more like permanence given form. When Saruman eventually made Orthanc his home, few questioned the decision. In truth, It seemed fitting. The greatest scholar among the wise, residing within one of the greatest structures in Middle-earth. A guardian watching over the western lands. Keeper of knowledge dwelling inside an ancient fortress. At first, that is exactly what Orthanc became. The traveler should not imagine immediate darkness. Not smoke, not armies, not furnaces. Those belonged to a much later chapter. For many years, Orthanc was a place of study, a place of observation, a place where maps, records, and centuries of accumulated knowledge gathered beneath one roof. The White Wizard transformed the tower into something few people ever saw. A vast center of learning. Messengers arrived from distant lands. Travelers brought news. Old manuscripts found homes within its chambers. Information flowed toward Orthanc from every corner of Middle-earth, and Saruman absorbed it all. The tower suited him perfectly. After centuries of wandering, he finally possessed a place where everything could be brought together. The histories of Gondor, the ruins of Arnor, the stories of Rohan, the lore of the elves, the records of Numenor. Piece by piece, he assembled a picture of the world larger than any individual had ever possessed. The traveler imagines the upper chambers of Orthanc during these years. Tall windows overlooking vast landscapes, shelves crowded with scrolls. Maps spread across enormous tables, stars visible through narrow openings high above the plains. Night after night, Saruman worked, reading, comparing, analyzing. The search never truly ended. If anything, it intensified. For now, he possessed something he had rarely enjoyed before. Control, not power over kingdoms. Control over his work. Control over the flow of information. Control over the flow of information. Everything came to him. Everything passed through Orthanc. The tower became an extension of his mind, a physical reflection of his desire to understand the world. And perhaps that is why it eventually became so dangerous. Because Orthanc encouraged isolation. The traveler noticed something important. During his years of wandering, Saruman constantly encountered new perspectives, new cultures, new people, and new ideas. The road itself challenged certainty. The tower did the opposite. Inside Orthanc, Saruman spent increasing amounts of time alone. Not entirely alone, but alone with his thoughts, alone with his conclusions, alone with his growing confidence. The world beyond the tower seemed increasingly chaotic. Kingdoms argued, leaders hesitated, the White Council debated endlessly. Meanwhile, Saruman looked upon maps and records and believed he saw the larger picture. The feeling was seductive, not because it promised power, because it promised clarity. The traveler can understand the temptation. Imagine spending centuries studying every major threat facing Middle-earth. Imagine gathering knowledge no one else possessed. Imagine seeing dangers others overlooked. Would it not become easy to believe your judgment should prevail? Would it not become easy to believe hesitation was weakness? These thoughts arrived slowly, year after year. The change remained almost invisible. The White Wizard still opposed Sauron, still served the cause of the free peoples, still believed himself their protector. Yet his vision of protection had begun changing. Knowledge alone no longer seemed sufficient. Warnings no longer seemed sufficient. Counsels no longer seemed sufficient. The world faced a growing shadow, and Saruman increasingly believed stronger measures would eventually be required. The traveler notices how the language of his thoughts begins shifting. Not dramatically, subtly. Once he asked how evil could be resisted. Now he asks how evil could be defeated permanently. Once he sought understanding. Now he seeks solutions. Once he studied power. Now he contemplates its use. Not for himself. At least, that is what he tells himself. For Middle-earth. For victory. For peace. History is filled with people who began exactly there. Orthanc stands silent beneath the stars. Its black walls catch moonlight. Its chambers glow with candlelight far above the plains. And within those chambers, the White Wizard continues working long into the night. The traveler imagines him standing beside a narrow window, the winds of Rohan moving across the dark landscape below. Maps spread across a nearby table, the future weighing heavily upon his thoughts. For centuries, he has searched for answers. Now he begins believing he has found them, and that belief changes everything, because the most dangerous step in Saruman's journey was never his desire for knowledge. It was the moment he began believing that only he possessed enough knowledge to save the world. Orthanc cannot yet see the future. Its stone walls do not know what is coming. But the seeds planted long ago in the libraries of Gondor, the ruins of Arnor, and the distant plains of ruin have finally begun to grow. And soon, beneath the shadow of the tower, they will bear fruit. The night is growing late now. The roads of Middle-earth stretch behind us. The libraries, the ruins, the endless plains of ruin, the forgotten stories preserved beneath ancient stars, all of them have led here, to Orthanc. To the final chapter of our journey. And yet, strangely, this is not truly the story of Saruman's fall. Not yet. That story belongs to another time, another tale. Tonight is about something quieter, something more tragic. The moment before the fall. The moment when a good man begins walking in the wrong direction without realizing it. The traveler looks upon Orthanc once more. The tower rises black against the night sky, ancient, silent, immutable. The winds sweep across the plains of Isengard. Stars drift overhead. Nothing appears different. Nothing appears wrong. And that is precisely the tragedy. Because evil rarely announces itself. It rarely arrives wearing armor and carrying banners. More often, it arrives disguised as certainty, as necessity, as good intentions carried too far. Inside Orthanc, Saruman continues his work. The same scholar, the same wizard, the same guardian who once crossed the sea to oppose darkness. His goals have not changed, at least not entirely. He still wishes to defeat Sauron, still wishes to protect Middle-earth, still believes himself a servant of a greater cause. The difference lies elsewhere. The difference lies in how he now views himself. For centuries, Saruman sought knowledge because knowledge served wisdom. Now, without fully realizing it, wisdom has begun serving ambition. Not ambition for a throne, not ambition for wealth. Something more subtle, the ambition to shape the future, the ambition to direct events, the ambition to become indispensable. The traveler imagines him standing alone in the highest chamber of Orthanc, looking out across the lands below, the same lands he has spent centuries protecting, the same lands he has spent centuries studying. He knows their histories, their strengths, and their weaknesses, perhaps better than anyone alive. And that knowledge has become a burden. Because the more Saruman learns, the less faith he places in others. The kings seem short-sighted. The councils seem indecisive. The guardians seem passive. Everyone appears too slow, too cautious, too unwilling to act. This is the final trap awaiting many wise people. The belief that understanding automatically grants authority, that intelligence automatically grants the right to decide. Saruman never consciously seeks tyranny. That is important. The traveler must understand that. He does not wake one morning and choose evil. Rather, he convinces himself that his judgment is simply better, more informed, more reliable. The difference seems small, yet entire tragedies have grown from smaller beginnings. Outside, the stars continue their ancient journey. They shine above Orthanc, just as they once shone above the libraries of Gondor, above the ruins of Arnor, and above the lonely campfires of Rhûn. The heavens remain unchanged. Only Saruman has changed, and even then, only slightly. The traveler might almost miss it. A touch more certainty, a little less humility, a little more confidence in his own conclusions. Tiny shifts, yet tiny shifts matter when they continue for centuries. The irony is heartbreaking. Everything Saruman learns is real. Everything he fears is real. Sauron is returning. Darkness is growing. The dangers are not imagined. His mistake is not in recognizing the threat. His mistake is believing that only he understands it. The White Wizard once traveled the world seeking wisdom from others. Now, he increasingly trusts only himself. The road has narrowed. The circle has closed. The seeker of knowledge has become its guardian, then its keeper, and finally, its prisoner. The traveler notices how perfectly Orthanc mirrors its master. A tower built to endure. A tower standing alone. A tower rising above the surrounding world. Strong, impressive, insulated. The image feels almost symbolic. The years ahead remain unwritten. The War of the Ring has not yet begun. The Fellowship has not been formed. The great betrayals still lie in the future. For now, there is only a wizard standing in a tower. A brilliant mind burdened by centuries of knowledge. A protector who increasingly believes that protection requires control. A servant who is beginning to forget the meaning of service. The night deepens around Orthanc. The winds move across the plains. The stars continue shining overhead. And somewhere beyond the horizon, countless ordinary people sleep peacefully. They do not know the choices being made. They do not know how history is changing. Most never will. History often turns upon private moments, quiet decisions, and invisible shifts within the human heart. Saruman's tragedy begins not with betrayal, not with armies, and not with war. It begins here, with a belief, a simple belief, that he alone can save Middle-earth. The traveler stands with that thought for a moment, not judging, not condemning, simply observing. Because that belief is understandable, human, and even noble at first glance. And perhaps that is why the story remains so powerful. Saruman was not destroyed as hateful as the kingdom of God. Saruman was not destroyed by hatred, matter. The tower remained silent beneath them, ancient, patient, watching. And as our journey comes to an end, the traveler looks back across the centuries. The young wizard arriving from the west, the scholar wandering forgotten kingdoms. The seeker crossing the endless plains of Rune, the guardian gathering knowledge for the sake of others. All of them were real. All of them were Saruman. Long before he became the figure remembered in war and tragedy. Long before the White Wizard fell, there was simply Saruman the Wise, a hero, a traveler, a scholar. And perhaps that is the saddest part of all, because for a very long time, he truly was. The end.